Hello, so I'm going to be showing you how to make a graph for your A-level physics practicals. Going to be showing you in Excel all the tips and tricks you need to get that graph correct and looking tidy. So I've made up some data first of all of force versus acceleration, as if I've measured the acceleration with a light gate by increasing the force. I've got three data sets, data set 1, 2 and 3. First thing we're going to need to do is add my headings in for my acceleration. So I'm going to click on the top row, right click, I click insert, that creates a new row above. I'm going to type into the left cell above dataset 1 acceleration. I'm going to add the unit, meters per second squared. Now I can't actually within Excel do the proper formulae. I would need to correct that later on in Word. Next, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create an average of these three sets of data. So I'm going to add average on the end here. To do an average, you need to use a formula. So you can type equals, type average, click on that there. I'm going to click the leftmost piece of data, this 0.50. I'm going to hold down shift and click on the data on the right. I'm going to close that bracket, and that is going to take the average of cells B3, which is this one, to D3 over here. That will include the two in the middle, the C3. Hit equals, and there is my average of those three pieces of data. To replicate that formula, I can click the little box in the bottom right of that cell and drag it down. That has now taken the average of all of those rows. Sometimes you'll see this little triangle come up in the top left. That's just to warn you there is an error. This one is telling me that the formula omits adjacent cells. So it's telling me that when I took an average, I didn't include this 3 over here on the left. I can ignore that error. Goes away. I'm not going to bother getting rid of all of them. But there you go, get rid of it if it is irritating you. Now I want to tidy up my heading on the top, so I'm going to click acceleration. I'm going to hold down shift and click across to E1. Then I have this button here, which is to merge and center. I click that and it puts my acceleration into the center of those 4 cells. This force / newtons, I'm going to hold shift and click above that one, merge and center that one. That's combined those cells, and I'm going to move that, clicking this middle align button to get it a bit tidier. I'm now going to highlight all of them holding shift and click to center, just tidy it up a little bit. And then this one here, I can see different borders I can add. I'm just going to click all borders and fill in my table that way. Okay, so now I have my data in my table, I can think about creating my graph. I'm going to click Insert, and I'm going to select this scatter graph. I'm not going to select a line graph because then it's going to add a line for me that I may not necessarily want. We start with a scatter graph. I add in my data by clicking Select Data. I can add them in one series at a time, so series 1, I click my X value in the left hand side. I hold shift and clicked the bottom to highlight that whole column. Then adding in my Y values, I'm clicking the 0.5 and the 0.38. Click OK, and it has added that series. Now I can add all of those series on there. There's series 2. I can add series 3. Oh, no, that's the Y values. Add series 3. And add in my average. There we go. So I've added in my 3 series there onto my graph. I'm probably not going to want to keep series 1, 2 and 3 on there. Probably just want my average, but I will leave it on there for now. Now, the next thing I'm going to want to do is tidy up the axes and then the grid lines. This button at the top left, when I'm on chart design, which you can always find just by double clicking on your graph. There you go, chart designs come back up. I click add. I can play about with my axes. I can play about with the titles on the axes, the chart title. I'm going to add a legend. I'm going to put that at the bottom so I remember which one's which. I'm going to add a grid line, the minor grid line horizontal and the minor vertical grid line. That's made my graph look a little bit more readable there, giving me the lines in between my axes values. I'm going to add in my axes titles. So on my horizontal axis, I wanted acceleration. And it's meters per second squared. Then on my vertical, I wanted to have a force in newtons. There we go. Now, you'll see I started off with a force of 3 newtons. I didn't start off at 0, so it hasn't given me a 0, 0 origin. Sometimes you may want to make sure your data has a 0, 0 origin, so you may want to modify that, or you may have your data starting way off from 0 and you want a false origin on your graph. Now you need your graph to fill at least half of the page. That's half the page when you print it and half of the page when it's on the grid itself. To modify my axes, I can click on it. You see I have axes options come up in the right hand side here. You can change the color of them. You can do a load of weird shadows on them, etc. What we want to do is go into axes options in this one on the right, and you can see here I can set the bounds. So I could change this to 0. There you go. And now I've got a 0, 0 origin, but you can see my data is now going to be far too small. That's not useful to me. So I'm going to change that to my lowest value, which was 3. My highest value was 3.5, so I'm going to make that 3.5. The automatic version of this will just have a lower and a higher bound, slightly lower and slightly higher than whatever your data is. I can then also have a look at what my major and minor axes values are on the data. Because I've gone up in 0.05s, that I may well want to put 0.05 there. There we go, so you can see the grid's got a little bit less there, but then that may be problematic when I go to read my values off of my gradient, so I'm going to leave that at 0.02. Okay, so now I have my horizontal axes fixed. I'm going to want to fix my vertical axes too. If I double click on that, it will bring up the axes options. I'm going to set my minimum of this to 0.48, just below my minimum value. And then I'm going to set my maximum to 0.60, which is just above my maximum value. My major and minor grid lines here, maybe questionable values in there. You just need to pick something that is suitable for your data set. So I now have my axes fixed. I have my grid lines on there. I've got my key on the bottom so I can see what each data set is. So at the moment, my data points are circles. You need to use either dots or crosses. So that may mean making the circles smaller or changing them to crosses. You can't use any strange shapes like squares or triangles, just dots or crosses. I'm going to show you how to do that. So if I click on a series of data, there I clicked on series 2. I have some series options here. Series options, if I go to this leftmost option, fill and line, I click on marker. I can change in marker options the shape of that point. At the moment it's automatic, but I can change that to a cross. There you go, we see some crosses on there now. I can also change the size of that cross. Let's bring it back. See, making that larger, making it smaller. You just need it an appropriate size for your graph. I'm going to do the same thing to my other data sets. You do not have to have them as crosses. You can have them as dots, that's fine. You just don't want your dots to be too large. You don't want large circles on there. Neither do you want it to be Neither do you want it to be a strange shape like any of these, triangles or diamonds. Kites, I should say. Okay, so I now have all three of those as a cross on there. My data is nicely laid out at the moment. Now on a graph, typically you wouldn't need to plot all of your data, you just be plotting your average. So for the sake of what we're doing now, I'm actually going to remove those three data sets. I can do that by clicking on them and then just clicking delete. I could also go into my select data here, and I could have just turned them off, or I could have deleted them from there. So now I've just got my average. I can get rid of my key. This is going to make my graph a little bit larger. I don't really need a title on there. So my graph is now done, now complete. The only thing I may want to do is add a trend line. Now, if I've got a very, very clear straight line in my graph, I can click on my data, right click, add trend line, and I could pick this linear trend line here, exponential, etc., etc. If I do this, I can click display equation on chart. There you go, display equation on chart. I can use that to check what the gradient is of my graph. Now, it wouldn't be enough just to say that is the gradient in your write-up of your practical. You do need to print this off, draw on the trend line yourself, and calculate it by drawing on the triangle, changing y over changing x. However, this is a useful tool for you to check what that value would be with your calculated value. I'm going to remove that for now, and I'm going to delete my trend line. There we go. So the last thing I'm going to need to do is make this large enough to print, and I do need to tidy up that unit on the bottom. I'm going to do both of those things in Word. Okay, so I have a Word document open now. I'm going to click Layout, and I'm going to change the orientation to landscape, just because I know my graph is going to fit a little bit better on there that way. I go into my Excel file, I'm going to copy my graph, I'm going to paste it in there using this one, use destination theme and embedded workbook. Otherwise, if I paste it in here as an image, which sometimes seems easier because it keeps the formatting the same, what happens is it loses some of its quality. If I zoom in on some of the text, you can see this has gone a bit fuzzy, and you can definitely tell when this is printed. So I'm going to paste it in, use destination theme and embedded workbook. Now what I can do is I can edit each of these features just like their text in Word, whereas an image I couldn't have. I'm going to sort out this unit, so this is MS, and then I can go to Home, I can click superscript, MS to the -2. There we go, unit fixed. I couldn't do that very easily in Excel, but easy to do once I'm in Word. I'm now going to make this as large as I can for my page, and that is now ready to print. I'll print this out. It's a full page graph. I can draw in my trend line with a ruler, draw on the triangle, and do change in y over change in x to find my gradient, remembering I have that value from Excel to check it against. Now, it's worth noting that if I wanted to take my data in my table out and print that out also, I'd need to correct these significant figures. A trick with the significant figures is if I highlight a column and then I go to number, I can move that decimal point around to put them all to the same resolution. My data was to 2 decimal points for my force, so those are all now matched. Do make sure you check that in your data before printing your graph. You do need to show your data to the same resolution as the instrument you measured it with. So best of luck with your graphs and goodbye.